Welcome to Glocal Voices, the official podcast of the Center for Socially Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina.
Good to have you, Micah. Really appreciate the opportunity to be, having you on Glocal Voices at the Center for Social Engaged Theatre here at the University of Regina. And your work is really fascinating because I think your work really touches on a core element of theater, of performance generally, of why theater and performance matters and all the embodied practice and things like that. So I'd like us to dive a little bit into that. But before we do that, I just wanted to introduce yourself today, Micah. So over to you to position.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I'm really glad to be in this conversation with you, Taiwo. Yeah, so my name's Micah. Jason Wonjun Kessel is my full name, which tells you a little bit about my background. I have a Korean mother. I have Buddhist Zen master, Jewish father who looks like, a tall white guy, but actually, has Jewish background. He's a child psychotherapist, so I grew up with a lot of sensitivity around me to some degree, and a lot of resilience from the Korean side, I would say. I'm a recovering opera singer, so that I started singing opera at a very early age. I was at the Metropolitan Opera at 10 years old. So I'm very used to a performance background. Before I was a legal professional adult, I was a, minor professional adult or minor professional. And got to be in a really high performance culture for decades.
Mm.
I was never so interested in the spotlight. And so, but I was really interested in how experiences like theater or opera can transport people into different value systems. I think standing, in front of an audience of 4,000 at the age of 11 years old and watching these people watch us, they weren't watching me so much, right? But Pavarotti or Domingo or Carol Vaness or the great singers of that time, Denise Graves, right? Like being able to watch them transport this audience through a story is passive entertainment in one way. But in another way, people go home and they think about these characters that have made these choices that are often socially, um, against the way of thinking of the time, for higher values, often emotional, social higher values, for love or for um, respect. And opera is about these things. And so people passively absorb that and don't, maybe actively think about how those values are being given to them. But I think over the course of the days and weeks after, those values are learned. And in life, we learn so much through experience. So at first, experience was a part of my career as an experiential designer. I created the world's top escape rooms, according to TripAdvisor. People who love games generally find that really fascinating. That company in Amsterdam is still in existence 10 years later, but I left after 3 years, realizing that what really fascinated me about experience was its ability to increase human flourishing, to increase the quality of our well-being. And so I was able to become design lead at an emotions research lab at Northeastern that studied emotions in the brain, and got to work with different researchers at other labs who study things like bias, empathy, and surrounding topics, I would say. And we have applied that research to be able to create a program that helps you take this age-old idea of walking in someone else's shoes, which of course is a really good idea, but inherently walking in someone else's shoes is sort of lacking in completion to create internal change. So we couple that point of view experiential moment with opportunities to reflect and opportunities to hear the wisdom of other seasoned thinkers and gain other perspectives, and then even socialize your new truth. So in those kind of four steps, experience, reflect, get new perspectives and socialize, we feel like we've created an experience that reflects the way that you learn in real life, but in the most ideal situation possible. And it gives you that experience in low doses over long periods of time, ideally, because a program where you're learning everything at once can be very powerful, but to create longitudinal impact, we found that low dose over long periods of time is also really important. So that's a little bit about me and why I created this program.
This is great. So part of what I've been doing in the past of this particular series on Glocal Voices has been part of the festival we're running this year, Festival of Art and Discourse, powered by Theatre Emissary International and Mobile Research Lab. And all of the researchers that I've been talking to, I think I've spoken to over 27 now. Part of what the question I've been asking them is and I know that you spoke a little bit about it, but I want you to speak more about why empathy, why the organization and the initiative that you're working on. Why that? And I know you talked about human flourishing, but I want you to kind of explain what it is and why it is.
Yeah, empathy is indeed a really interesting word, considering, that here we are 2 days after the death of someone who didn't believe in it, that was having, really prominent influence in the United States in conservative youth culture. I know empathy is on people's minds a lot of, today as we're recording this, but it's been on people's minds quite a bit. And in some ways, it's a very new word, and it's a very misunderstood word. I think it's even misunderstood by the dictionary itself. Empathy is often defined as the ability to understand how other people feel or to feel into their feelings. Right, in German, Mitgefühl is the word that's often used to say where empathy came from to some degree. But scientifically, we know we'll never truly be able to understand how someone else feels. Emotions are
Mm,
not universal, right? A stoic face means something different in 20 different cultures. And we don't know why people do what they do, and often they don't even know themselves when we make choices in life. So that definition of empathy doesn't grab me personally, but I also have seen it misfire and backfire. And I actually think a lot of the pushback that society has on empathy is due to this misunderstanding of it. The definition of empathy that I think is highly impactful and effective is actually the idea that empathy is this ability to acknowledge that the meaningfulness of another person's story is as meaningful as the stories in your own life. It's
mm,
holding equal value not to the content of that story per se, or what that story is implying about their perspectives, but actually the idea that there's reverence for that person's story in the same way that there's reverence for your own story. So you don't
mm,
actually have to agree with someone. You don't have to understand their feelings because you never will anyway. You don't have to feel their feelings because you never will anyway to be able to empathize. You just have to in that moment have a presence of mind and to realize that the story that they're telling you is equally meaningful in their life to the story in your own. And ideally, I'd then apply the curiosity to learn more about that story so that you can allow that story to be a catalyst for remembering that your own stories are important. And I think that's why empathy is so special, because stories are the way that we have translated and passed down generational wisdom since the beginning of tribal culture of human beings. And to some degree, maybe we're losing this a bit. I know I'm not the best storyteller, but I try to be better. Um, And at the same time, stories are the things that define our lives and help us humanize each other. Data doesn't influence conflicting opinions in politics very well, but stories do. And and um, and empathy is this really unique tool that can be in service, therefore, a lot of the outcomes we're looking for. People often think we do empathy training, and we do train empathy, but most of the time we're training empathy in service of something else, whether it's
that's true.
stronger performance or better social cohesion or deeper belonging, or better patient experience, right? These are all ways that empathy can be applied in service to a specific outcome. And that's why I think it's so powerful.
Mm. Interesting. So what are the highlights for you? And you've been doing this for X number of years now. And again, like you correctly said, it's coming out of your, many years of experience and working with researchers and labs and innovations and all of that. What are the highlights for you that, this initiative and your organization, and where are the spaces that you have been working? Like, what are the key highlights when we think about empathy that you want somebody to go with, you want somebody to go away with? It sounds like what you're doing again is to help us rethink the idea of empathy, to redefine it, to understand it, to debunk the idea that we have, and for us to have to gain new perspectives. What are those highlights, ideas that you want to share with us about your work?
Well, do you mean the highlights in terms of what we've been able to, what we've experienced, or sorry, or
I think both of them, in terms of what you've learned through the process, what are the key critical pillars of your work, but also the highlight of what you've experienced. I think it's both.
oh,
I think it can go those two ways. Yes.
great, because I thought you were asking me the second. I'll answer that one first, and then I'll
Yes.
go
And
to
then go to the
sort of
first
my
one.
my takeaways. So yeah, I mean, since I'm talking so much about stories, I'll share three highlights. One of them will not be a story, but the other two will. So just very factually, it's been a privilege to be able to share this experience with over 15,000 people at over 100 organizations, everything from leaders at Meta and Deloitte and Cisco and Target and places that have a lot of trickle down impact, all the way to top universities like Harvard and Duke, but also UVA, smaller universities also as well. And some schools, some middle schools. It's been a wonderful process of continually trying to unfold and improve the way that training looks and feels in a world where training is either checkboxing, box checking, or it's a big yawn, right? People tend to get really their eyes roll to the back of their head when you think
Mm,
about the idea of training, but training is really the kind of neglected stepsister of learning. And everybody loves to learn, but people don't want to be trained. And I think there's a huge discrepancy there. So we need to make training feel more like genuine learning, and that's why learning through experience is so powerful when it's scaffolded in an impactful way. So it's been a privilege doing that. The two stories I'll tell you, one was we were sharing once with chiefs of staff at one of the top two hospitals in the United States. I won't say which one. And uh, and we shared with the chief of medicine, chief of nursing, chief of pediatrics, two others. And I'll never forget, we had the chief of nursing walk in the shoes of a non-binary college professor. And this person talked about their experiences and challenges of people understanding how to use pronouns in their world and understanding how they identify. And she went through this immersive experience, this chief of nursing. And afterwards, really lovely lady, she said to us, I've gone through so many different trainings on pronouns and so forth until now, and I never really got it. This is the first time where I actually get why it's important, and I actually feel like I understand how to apply the knowledge that I received. And
mm,
she's in charge of 400 nurses. So the
wow.
the, the trickle down impact of someone kind of conceptually hearing about something from PowerPoint presentations versus actually being able to have that lived experience, even if it's in a way where they're, not having it themselves, but actually that there's benefit to that because they have the distance from it to also be able to reflect. That was kind of a moment where we realized we should be doing, we want to be able to serve every hospital in the country with
Mm,
experiences that help improve patient care. That was the moment where a seed was planted, that was so important. Um, and I'll share another story that I really like. It was Fortune 50 company. We were in a live session where a white older man and a black woman were walking in the shoes of a black professional woman who was walking down the street, and it was a conversation about people not making space for her on the sidewalk.
mm,
And most of our experiences these days are about leadership and management. DEI is kind of infused in what we do, although we don't use those words. And we even before the pushback in DEI, we kind of led with empathy. So those aren't words we use explicitly very often. We feel like we embed it in the work we do instead of being explicit about it. And that generally has less pushback. It's better integrated that way. But I do remember this conversation so well because these two colleagues were in real time in this session with 15 other people as leaders, as managers of this Fortune 50 company. And he said to her, when it comes to, women and black women not getting space on the sidewalk and people ignoring them or even, shoving them out of the way, he said, "Is this really a thing?"
Hmm.
And she said, "Yeah, it's a thing. It happens to me every week." He
Hmm.
said, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah, really." And I even talked to my teenage daughter about how this happens. Um, and uh, and it's a regular topic of conversation that you need to learn how to take up the space that you deserve to have. And he said, "Well, now I'm gonna, make sure I get out of the way with you, out of the way every single time we pass each other on the hallway." And she said, "Yeah, you better get out of the way." And they joked about it because they were friends, and this was a really amicable conversation. But I would be willing to bet that that gentleman, that really well-meaning gentleman, probably became more aware of the space that he took up when he maneuvered in the world for the rest of his life. And the idea that an experience can do that. I mean, experiences do that all the time, right? In our real lives, we go to the supermarket, we have a, fight with our spouse, whatever it is, we have an experience that impacts our way of thinking. But the idea that we can manufacture experiences based on real moments in real people's lives, scale
Hmm.
that out, give them to many people at once, and that they can all have that kind of firsthand impact is the reason that I love what we do so much.
This is amazing because it just reminded me of a story many years ago. I did a project in when I was in Victoria. It was an immigrant, immigrant experience and different things like that. What's fascinating though was that I did this performance, and then after the performance, a professor that has been at the university for over 15 years actually walked up to me and he said, "Well, I just learned something new, and I thought it was going to be revolutionary, revelatory for me." And then he said, "Well, he didn't know why, s- Asian students had to change their names from, um, have to have an English name,
Right, right.
Krista to pineapple to apple." And he was feeling so ashamed that he had students in his class, but the moment that we're able to do theater, and the kind of work I do is theater, improvisation, devising, verbatim theater, and the list goes on and on. And because there's a part of that work, of that entire experience, that we kind of dealt with name, what is in a name, and people share their story, and we did different workshops and things like that. And then after that, I said, well, this is not an indictment, this is an invitation. It's an invitation. Now that you know, what would you do with it? And then I think few months later, I think I received an email from him saying that now, based on that particular project and that performance and the workshop that he did, he now, anytime any Asian student comes to his class, especially, whether it's from China or Japan or South Korea, and they tell him their English name, he will say, "Okay, I get it. Please, can you tell me your name and tell me the story behind it?" And then he said it kind of, so it's interesting how, and that's what I part of what I find fascinating with what you're doing is that it's not just touching people's head, you're getting to people's heart. You're offering space to for new perspectives, like you rightly said, from experience to reflection to gaining new perspectives, and then of course to socialize. And I kind of like that framework. You want to speak more about that framework, if it's okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, it's funny that you say getting to people's hearts. I was just talking a few days ago with I saw that a friend of mine had become an accountant at a company, and I thought, oh, but he's not an actuary. And our chief financial officer said, well, you can be an accountant without, it can mean many different things. And
Mm,
my response was, well, I guess then, I would call myself a scientist in the same way because, I don't have a PhD in the social sciences, but working with top social scientists and doing a lot of research myself, being a researcher has really means that in a way I have the heart of a scientist. And at the same time, I laugh
mm.
at that statement because it's a very unscientific statement. Um,
Because you do
right,
no theory, no theorem, no nothing, no
right.
laboratory.
Yeah, like, I don't necessarily, I mean, I'm very comfortable with a universe
Mm,
that it can be attempted to be explained.
mm,
And so for me, the idea that we're speaking to people's hearts in a metaphoric sense, absolutely. But in a scientific sense, the brain is a prediction machine, right? We're constantly making predictions of what's happening in this moment. So, you've given podcasts before. I've been on podcasts before. So the way that I'm behaving now is a product or a result of all the different podcasts I've been on previously and the predictions I'm making about the way that I could be in that podcast, right? And that's sort of the that keeps the bandwidth, right? The metabolic output balanced, right? Because I don't have to exert a lot of energy because I know the idea of Micah in a podcast. And then the actual metabolic energy goes to asking myself, well, what do I want this one to be that's different from the ones I've done before? And right, that's the exertion is the learning, or that's a large set of exertion is the variation from the norm of our predictions. And
Hmm.
so really what we're doing in this program is we're admitting that, if we're all walking around making these predictions around the world around us, whether that's, as Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett would say, right, the big B of the small b of bias being, do I like, vanilla yogurt or cherry yogurt?
Hmm.
And the large B of bias being, how do I feel about different races or genders? But either way, these are biases, and these biases are based on predictions. So we gain these predictions through experiences, and if we are able to give people experiences that give people the ability to predict new things, that's what we're doing. That when we talk about speaking to people's hearts, what we're actually doing is we're turning on tiny little epiphany style light bulbs
Yeah.
in their
Yeah.
mind saying, this is another possibility of the world around you. And I think that's so effective because it's never negating we're never explicitly negating the idea of the world that they are currently predicting. We're never saying the way you see the world currently is wrong, right? A lot of the pushback
Hmm.
of conservative beliefs on liberal beliefs and vice versa is this constant diminishing of people's realities, saying that your belief is wrong, but that belief is based on a whole set of life experiences. And so it's like a landmine. You're stepping on the landmine, which is their opinion, but underneath that landmine is a whole, nutrient-rich soil that you're also risking to destroy, which is every experience, all the memories that make up the story of their life. It's not an effective way. We have to, and that kind of, also answers the question of what are one of my bigger realizations in sharing this program.
Hmm.
We have to get out of a world where we think that the most effective way to make change is debate. There is a space for debate, but debate has fallen off the rails. I think we'd all agree, and it's not an effective way to actually, do anything but polarize us further. And it's because this perspectives and opinions are useful to some degree, but when it comes to human relational understanding and human cohesion and connection, they're very you can either agree with someone. Great.
Hmm.
So we've in-grouped. So now, we agree with each other, but that doesn't help anybody else that doesn't agree with us. Or we disagree, which means now we're in a state of defensiveness, most
Hmm.
likely. Or, I disengage and I become apathetic and I pull back. And that apathy is maybe the worst of it all, right? Because the apathy is people who don't vote, or the apathy is people who don't make an impact in society when they could be, in terms of
Hmm.
social change. And so in the role-playing game of life, those three options are all pretty crappy when it
Hmm.
comes to human behavior, to human social change. But the ability to hear someone's story as an alternative, and to use story to be able to develop culture or to solve problems, to gain perspectives, to create better outcomes, um, that's a very different paradigm because first of all, you don't have to disagree with a story. Um, Sorry, give me 1 second.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
Sorry. You don't have to disagree with a story, right? The story you told me, my reaction to your story will never be, Taiwo, your story is wrong, right? Because it's your story. And in that story, you've probably shared with me 27 other pieces of information that also are again nutrient rich. I can absorb that as part of what you've shared with me, and I get a wholeness of a person and so many points that I could potentially relate to, even if I don't agree with the perspective that your story is implying. I've further humanized our relationship. And then the next most important step is for me to either be more curious and ask more questions about your story, or to share a story of my own so that you have the opportunity to connect with me on that level as well. That's the power of experiences and storytelling versus perspective and opinion sharing and debate.
That's true.
So that's a big realization in terms of, I think, a big change that would need to happen if we're going to have effective social culture in the years to come.
And no, yeah, interesting. Um, moving away from debate, and I've been playing around with this idea of what is to what if, and I'm trying to remember the writer now. It's not coming to me. I think it's Hopkins. Hopkins wrote about what is to what if in one of the books. And I think that debate right now is what is. It's what is existing right now. And you're offering us something else to think about because I mean there's a place for debate, but at the same time, uh, there are some spaces that it's not for it.
Yeah, d debate in just like a scientific experiment, we need the guardrails up when it comes to debate. We need very specific ground rules and
Yeah.
and a very specific format, and a set of agreements on which that debate is going to occur.
Mm.
So the debates we're seeing on social media are, I think we should even be using a different word.
No, I
Uh,
don't think it's debate on social media, in my
Right,
opinion.
right.
Um, so two more questions for you, and if you have any question for me, please feel free to ask. What are your aspirations as you think about empathy and the work and the organization and the things you're doing? What are the what are your aspirations as you move forward? What are the things you're looking forward to? Yeah, I'd love to just know that, and our listeners to also know that to in which that folks can actually connect.
Yeah, if you're listening, I hope this speaks to you. I want to live in a world where we can open up our phones and watch an experience through the eyes of another person, in like a point of view format, or in a story told format that gives us something that we couldn't have gotten just in our direct environment. Whether that's, walking in the shoes of a 97-year-old Portuguese fisherman who's never left his village, or walking in the shoes of a Jane Goodall type, or the CEO of Pepsi, or right, someone who has spent the last 15 years teaching oil painting in Iceland. Uh, there's something about
Mm.
the human experience that is so um, enlivening for almost everyone I know. And I want to create an opportunity for people to dive into that, not because of a sense of should, uh, right? Not because they feel like they need to learn something to be more socially conscious even per se, but because they're just genuinely interested in it. The area where documentaries are this really wonderful attempt to make entertainment enriching. And I think there's space to explore there where enriching learning can happen in a social media context without being flooded and bombarded with advertising and with things that are meant to just get your, blood boiled, um,
Mm.
and your brain spiked. I think there's a way to, I believe in a world of media that is flows really well, goes from one experience to another, allows you to gain experience points that
Mm.
you can be proud of, the same way that people are proud of their streaks on Duolingo, and really apply the most fundamental truth that we know in science about how to become a more socially conscious, better contributor to the world, which is exposure to difference. but do
Mhm.
so in a way that feels really pleasing and meaningful and enjoyable. That's what excites me about the future that we're working on. Is I think whether that's specifically in an environment like a hospital or a school or an organization, or whether that's for the general public, I think there's lots of opportunities there to inspire, to entertain, and to keep people really reflecting on themselves and being able to develop their own personal stories in a more enriching way. Um, but I do want to ask you the same question since you gave me the permission to ask you
Yes.
questions. Yeah, what are you most excited about in the work that you do and in the future that you're creating?
So I think for me, one of the things I always talk about who I am becoming. As much as what we're doing is important, is critical, and everyone would justify how important what they're doing is, well, and all of that. I think for me, the question that constantly stare at me every day is who am I becoming? Because I think that all that we're doing with empathy that you're doing and all that, it's shaping, potentially shaping what somebody's going to become. Somebody that wasn't listening initially, or that is not understanding the other person, hopefully can come to that point where they can become a better listener. They can become, lend a hand, or open their hearts to exposure to difference and all of that. And so what I'm excited about, it's both excitement, but at the same time is also a point of reflection for me all the time, is that who am I becoming? And the people that are working with me, how is that shaping who they are becoming?
Mm,
So when I'm thinking of from personal, from the individual, the student that I'm working with, to community members, to organizations, to countries across different scales, I am constantly thinking that the things that I'm doing has the potential to add to shape who they are becoming. That's exciting for me. Very exciting. But I'm then terrified at the same time. And that's where the ethics come in. And I'm taking a step back to start thinking, whatever I am doing, what is that shaping them to becoming in whatever they are becoming? And so
mm,
it's both sides. So it's like, yes, I'm excited about that. I'm excited that my students, they graduate with their masters, their PhD, their undergrad. I'm excited that, the artists, in the community, they get training in art leadership. I'm excited, that people get to see the work that we're doing, and, different things like that. And they're having interaction with whatever I'm doing, whether it's theater, whether it's anyway, in all that I'm doing, my research, in my teaching, and in my community engagement, in consulting, and all of those things. But then I'm asking myself, this is the other side too. So that's excitement, right? But then I'm like, how is that? I hope that whatever they're encountering from me is hopefully adding to shaping who they are becoming in a positive way, whatever that positive means, right? So
mm,
that's that's a tension for me that and then in terms of activities or the various things that we're doing, I'm also really excited about the opportunity to learn from, with, alongside, because that has been remarkable that you have that opportunity to, especially in a university, and also in community, you have the opportunity to be able to again, to learn with one another, learn alongside one another. So really, and I think maybe it's also because it's theater, to offering us that opportunity to constantly think about what if, the kind of future that we want to envision together collectively. Like it's offering us this moral imagination to think differently,
mm,
at least the possibility that we can, because now that we know that even all this, whatever we have right now, in speculative theory, in future studies and future thinking and all that, especially in science fiction, these things that are now in existence, they've been in existence for a very long time in science fiction, like for a very long time it's been there. So again, performance, going back to where we started from, performance, theater, and all of these different art forms, still gives us the opportunity, the possibility to tap into our moral imagination. And I'm excited about that I'm able to put on a show and somebody's able to say, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Or you do your workshop where you used embodied process and all the framework that you've designed, and somebody is able to, like, that's the beautiful story that you shared. I'm excited
Yeah.
about that. And that, I think that's the space and the place that are critical for us to have those kind of exposure to difference and then shape
I
who
love
we are.
that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's, the fictional reality of our lives is something that we forget because we see
Mm,
ourselves as singular objective beings moving through the world, when the truth is we're continually being influenced by the environment around us and reshaping who we are, and actively forgetting who we were, sometimes because we have to, sometimes just because the brain only can store what it can, and makes, prioritizes certain types of information. And so we forget that we live in a fictional reality, that is being co-created and socially constructed by ourselves. And that, each of our individual perceptions of that reality are so highly subjective that only to some degree do we know that when we're talking about the color pink, we're talking about the same color, and probably we're not talking about the exact same color. And in that sense, the ability to dive into theater and make believe is also just shining a light on the fact that theater and make believe is our real life already.
I agree. I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah,
I agree. Well, I think I want to bring this to a close, and just want to offer the space to, are there last final thoughts that you want to share, as we bring this episode to a close, and really thinking about future aspirations or potential ways that listeners can connect to your work. We'll try to put your website too, in the descriptions and all of that. But are there other things you'd like to share? As you
yeah. I mean, yeah. Indeed, in terms of reaching out to us, I think it's good for people to know that Empathable, our company, which is,
impact.
think about empathy and able, but without the Y, right? So empathable.com. Empathable is not a venture-backed uh, corporate training company whose goal is to be as narrow and focused on one ROI as possible to make
Mm,
the biggest return for our investors. We're here to be able to, and I think that makes us unique in a world of trading that is generally quite venture backed. Um, I think we're here to solve the real problem of the way that a lack of uh, insight into each other's realities has really um, sad and disheartening and dangerous consequences. And that the gentle solution of opening to perspectives is is perhaps one of the most powerful tools we have in our tool shed that everybody has to strengthen those muscles, those empathy muscles. And so we're here for everyone, even if we serve organizations and schools and so forth. You can reach out to us. If that's something you're interested in. And we're actually creating, for those who are in the workforce or who are going to be someday soon, like students, we're going to be releasing a managing up experience. For those of you who don't know, managing up is the idea of how do individual contributors or employees, right, work better with their managers. There's plenty of the reason we're creating this in part is because organizations have budgets for manager training, but they don't have budgets for individual contributors. And yet those folks need to be professional. They need professional development too. So we're
mm.
offering, this program for people to be able to learn how to do that. And that's great for individuals. You don't have to get your company to buy it to use it yourself. So yeah, you're really welcome to reach out to us no matter what. And we're here to really see what empathy can do to create a world of deeper human flourishing and wellness together. So
Well, thank you so much. I've been chatting with Micah, from Empathable. Did I get that correctly?
You did,
Yes, I did.
empathable. Yeah, that's right.
I did,
Yeah.
yes. And really talking about empathy and the amazing work that they're doing in the US, but also beyond US in other spaces too. I do hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And then again, special thanks to our festival that all of this series is part of, Festival of Art and Discourse, and of course the Center for Social Engaged Theatre. And I also want to say thank you to Micah from Empathable for spending the time to talk about the amazing work they're doing around empathy and really as a necessary tool for human flourishing. With Taiwo Afolabi from the Center for Social Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina. And I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.
You have been listening to Glocal Voices, the official podcast of the Center for Socially Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina. For more details about the center, visit www.cset.ca.